Perfect. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. And it's our pleasure to have the greatest in the Microsoft Dynamics community, Alex Meyer, all the way from the US, and Andre, all the way from Netherlands. And good morning, very good morning to Alex. I know it's very early in the morning, and thank you so much for your support, for your community love. Uh, and Andre, I I do not have enough words to say about yourself. It's Thank you so much. It's our honor to have both of you here for as a Pakistan user and presenting at the Pakistan user group. Uh, as we understand, today is a very special day for us at a community where we are going to talk about I think so, the most hot topic nowadays, and more discussions going around with the licensing. What's going to happen with the licenses, especially in the Microsoft Dynamics finance and operations and supply chain product? It has been a mystery, and it is still a mystery, I'll say. And so let's try to unreveal few things from the experts. I'll hand over to Alex and Andre. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you everybody for joining today. Like was mentioned, this is a very hot topic and things are changing very quickly in this space. So Andre and I will try to do our best to lay out kind of where we're at and where we came from and kind of what the vision is kind of going forward in this. So really looking at what are the licensing changes that are occurring in D365 today. We're going to focus in on that area. Really quick intros from our side. My name is Alex Meyer. I'm a principal software engineer from Delinea. I've been speaking in this space or been in the dynamic space since 2013. Speaking on all sorts of security and licensing and kind of more technical topics since 2016. I'm really happy to be here today. And one of my mentors, as I was kind of coming up, presenting alongside today, is Andre. So Andre, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself quick.
Yes, well, my name is Andre Arnaud de Colofon. I live in the Netherlands. I started my career a long time ago in 1996, so almost 30 years. Initially, I was working with Navision Financials for the first 5 years in my career. Then I switched to the Damgaard Axapta product in 2001, and since then, never left the product anymore. I left some employers, but currently I'm just employed at Next 365, where I'm a manager partner and just helping to grow the business worldwide, but also my main focus would be then the Netherlands.
Awesome. Thanks, Andre. And so the real overview, I guess, of what we're going to talk about today. As we jump into this, Andre and I are both going to take kind of certain topics on kind of where we're the strongest at. So you'll see us kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. But we're really looking at, starting and kind of laying the base work of what's the F&O security model. And the reason we talk about the security model is really the fact that, security and licensing are tied together, right? And we'll show that association there. We'll talk about the new license enforcement from the Microsoft perspective and kind of what that looks like. The new licensing model that exists that Microsoft is kind of pushing out along with the license enforcement. We'll look at kind of the reporting side from, where can we actually get licensing data, whether that's from your Power Platform Admin Center or PPAC or LCS or Lifecycle Services, and what some of the new features and functionality Microsoft has around that. And then finally, we'll talk about the user security governance feature within D365 and kind of what features and functionality that adds on top of this. So we have a jam-packed session here. As we go through this, you guys have questions, you can feel free to put them in either the Q&A or the chat of the meeting, or if you have questions after it, always feel free to reach out to Andre and I. We're both very active on the community forums, on our own blogs, and on Yammer if you're on there as well. So feel free. There's a number of different ways to reach out and contact us. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into what does the F&O security model look like. And again, the reason we're doing this is because there is a tie between security and the licensing. And so really at just a super high level, right, is this idea that your FNSC or F&O security model, right, is role-based security. There's users that are assigned to one or more roles in the system, right? So a user has no access in the system until you assign them a role, and then they get whatever access that role is assigned. And then you have this idea of the hierarchy-based security model, right? So if you've been in this space before, if you've seen Andre and I talk before, it's very likely you've seen the diagram on the right side of the screen here, right? Where you have your users at the top, they're assigned roles. They have this role duty privilege hierarchy where each layer gets more defined on or more specific on what that layer gives access to. And then at the bottom, you have your objects that are actually telling you, what are driving that actual security, right? And so as we talk about things here in just a bit, as far as kind of the new object-based licensing, right? Those licenses are actually going to be attached to those objects, right? So when we talk about secureable objects here, right, that's what that's going to translate to here in just a little bit. So just wanted to give a really, really quick background of kind of the overview of what the security looks like, simply because security and licensing are going to be tied together, right? And so this is a way for us to kind of, we have to give the background of what the security model looks like, right? So that we can have a better idea of what are the licensing impacts of that, right? And so one of the key differences, I guess, of D365 itself is that the licenses are based on the license requirements for a user are based on what a user is assigned, not what they actually consume, right? So it doesn't matter if you don't even log into the system, right? If you are assigned that access, right? Microsoft is basically saying that you should, and you're enabled in the system, right? That you should have a particular license, right? And so that's really one of the key differences, I think, or makes it unique in the space, ERP space, is that it's not really based on utilization or consumption. It's based on what you're assigned. And so what this can, very quickly lead to then, all right, is that if you are over provisioned from a user access perspective, right, if you go in and assign a bunch of roles to a user that they don't need, that's going to directly impact and require that this user have more licenses assigned to them, which is going to drive up the cost for that particular user or set of users, right? And so what this really does is kind of force companies to start to look at, actually assigning or taking a look at best practice, right, and start to look at least privilege security, right, and instead of just assigning every role that the user might potentially need, right, really looking at what is this user doing on a day-to-day basis, right, and what do they actually need versus what are they currently assigned. And so this is kind of driving that home, the idea of the licenses, right, drives that point home a little bit more clear, right, because once you get money behind it, all of a sudden it makes everyone's ears perk up from that perspective. So we can go ahead, and I know Andre wants to talk about kind of the different licenses that exist within D365.
That's correct. Thank you. Well, actually, if you look at the Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations product itself, Microsoft made it a bit harder, where the CE-based apps all do have an own app installation and own access point to just start the application. They can just directly just enforce and check for licenses on the users for those kind of applications. If you look at the finance operations apps, then Microsoft did split the application into something they call now finance, something supply chain management, commerce, human resources, and project operations, which is all in just one single just code base, one application to be able to just do a license enforcement, it was very hard. At least I was expecting a license enforcement already way before today. However, how they're doing it now, it was just a bit quickly. And for that reason, they postponed a bit of the license requirements. If you look at just the licenses available for example, supply chain management finance, there are some base licenses with the highest price. And there are also just self-service team members functionality where you can do just simple tasks in the application like time writing or just expense management. And there's a level in between, which is called an operations activity. And in case, as just as Alex already mentioned, if you just provide more and more rules to a user, then it might be the case that a user is not only a finance user anymore, but also supply chain management. In that case, they need an attached license. And attached licenses are a bit cheaper. If you can go to the next slide, please, Alex. Then you can see an overview of what Dynamics 365 application in the base and what attached licenses are allowed. If you have finance, then you can use supply chain management, human resource, project operations, and some more. But if you start with a base human resources, as that is a cheaper license, there's no option to have an attached license available for finance. So it's just the highest price, which is allowing you to have just the lower prices on an attached license. Well, I think we can hand it over back to you, Alex, for the next topic.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so what do we start to talk about, right, when we're talking about these updates to license methodology? What are we really talking about here? So the first thing is really about, and probably the main reason that a lot of people probably joined this type of session, right, is this idea of the license enforcement, right? And so earlier this year, it was kind of in March, I think, timeframe, Microsoft announced, right, that they were going to start performing user license compliance analyses, right, as part of the application sign-in, right? So when a user would sign into the D365 application, right, there would be an analysis performed to say, here's what the user's assigned, right? Here's the roles. Here are the licenses that are required for those roles, right? Is the user actually assigned those licenses, right? And this has never happened before in D365, right? There was, you would have your license renewals, right, where you would actually go in and Microsoft would maybe wave their hand and say, we think you need this, right? But based on, some legacy reports, right, that existed, but it was never done during the actual sign-in of the application, right? A user would never be kicked out or not allowed to be logged in if they weren't assigned correctly. So you really had these inflection points, right, where at your license renewals, right, you would have to make sure you were trued up. But in between those, right, there wasn't any real enforcement. And so Microsoft basically announced that they wanted to start doing the enforcement during the sign-in, which would kind of, force companies to make sure that they were licensed correctly throughout the lifespan of the application, let's say. So they wanted to stagger the actual implementation of this, and the dates for these have been pushed back quite a bit. And so just know that these dates are not set in stone, although they haven't moved in at least a couple months now. But the idea is that September 1st of this year, a soft enforcement will go in, which means that if a user signs into D365 and is not assigned the correct licenses, they'll receive an info log or pop-up banner, right, that comes up and basically says, hey, you're not assigned the correct licenses. Make sure that you are need to contact your sysadmin and get that fixed. And then November 1st, there'll actually be a hard enforcement, which means that the hard enforcement is the user will be stopped during the login process and not be able to log in if they're not assigned the correct licenses. So one key point here is that the license enforcement will only impact your production level environments, right? So lower tiers, your dev, UAT test, right? Anything non-prod will not have this license enforcement piece applied to it. So I think Andre, you wanted to talk about kind of where we came from.
Yeah. Initially, if we go back to Dynamics AX 2012, then we had different license tiers with 4 different levels, where we now have just base license, finance, and then operations activity, and we have a team member license. In the past, all was managed on menu entry points, where there was a maintain user license and a view user license level. In between, when Microsoft created the split between the applications for licenses on finance, supply chain, etc., then they realized that it was not sufficient, as on the menu item itself there was only an operations level for the highest base license, and there was no split for finance, SCM, commerce, etc. And for that purpose, Microsoft created an additional JSON file which was embedded in one of the DLLs of the application, which was extracted also in an SQL table, where it was maintained which privilege is related to finance, which is related to supply chain management, commerce, project operations, etc. So when creating security rules, then the calculation logic was first looking at, can I find an entry for this privilege? Yes, it could be a supply chain management, or maybe it could be either finance, SCM, or commerce, then you could choose. If there was no information, then it would go back to the menu item entry point, where it did check for what is the access level. If it was more than read only, it looked at maintain user license, and a view user license was in the meantime also changed by Microsoft to be only a team member requirement, where it in the past also could have just for reading financial data, could be an enterprise license as well. However, in the Dynamics 365 world, it was moved back to read only. There are some issues with that current reporting, and to be able to do the license enforcement correctly, then something did change, and then Alex will guide you more on these changes.
All right, so where are we moving towards, right? And so one of the big pushes that Microsoft has had, not just for licensing, but the overall, D365 FNSC application itself, right, is that they want to have more of the management and the technical tasks being done in the Power Platform Admin Center, right? And so one of the big changes in this case is that they've moved all of the license calculation itself into the Power Platform Admin Center. And so what happens is the data that is generated by this calculation is then pushed out to all of the other platforms, right? And this helps to solve one issue that they had previously, in that depending on which platform you went to, right, you may get different license reporting from that, right? Whether you went to LCS or you went to M365 or you went to D365 itself, right? You may get different answers about the licensing based on which application or platform you went to, just because the calculation being done in each of those individual systems was different. Now you have a single source of truth, being PPAC, and that data gets pushed out. One of the big issues with this, or one of the gaps, I guess, that Microsoft is trying to shrink, is the idea that your PPAC licensing has a refresh rate, right? It isn't instantaneous, right? When you make a change to security or make a change to, assigning a role due to your privilege to a user, that isn't immediately updated across every platform. There is a refresh cycle that's occurring. Initially, this was, up to 72 hours, right, that it could take to bring that across. And that has now gotten shrunk down to 8 hours. But there's also the fact that what we did find is that even though the reporting, or at least what we've been told, is that even though the reporting is, taking up to 8 hours to refresh, right, you don't have to wait 8 hours, right? If you go in and assign a role to a user that requires a different license and assign it, right, for that to come across. That piece will happen automatically or immediately, but the reporting side of it could take up to 8 hours to actually reflect that, right? And so that's kind of the one of the key differences here as well. But big thing, I guess, from this, PPAC is your source of truth for licensing. It gets pushed out to all your other systems. And we'll do a deeper dive into what data is actually coming from PPAC here in just a second, so we can kind of figure out where the base data is coming from. So what we can do in the meantime though, is go in, I can pass over back to Andre and talk about, what is Microsoft doing about the legacy license reporting within D365.
Yep, thank you. At least Microsoft announced that the legacy license calculation, which was within the application itself, is deprecated. It also means that old license reports, the report with the green dots, is gone. But also, if you were used to go to the view permissions from the security configuration form, or if you wanted to just assign roles to users, there was a license level on each individual detail. That's also just not always accurate. So Microsoft said, well, we will remove those columns. To be honest, I was really sad about that because it was just my, initially my single sort of truth, but Microsoft changed the rules over here. So we have to learn living with some new information. At least I provided some feedback to Microsoft stating that, please, we need to know exactly what license requirements are there for each role, duty, and privilege. There's underlying data. So if you would like to acknowledge, please bring it back in a future version. At least Microsoft acknowledged it, but we don't know when exactly that will be on the roadmap to have that information back, but then based on the new license tables.
Awesome. Yeah. So,
let's introduce what's here now today.
Yeah. The deprecation of these reports is definitely a thing that we're seeing catching some clients by surprise, right? They've done this process for years. They go and run this report, and all of a sudden it's gone. So definitely good to keep that in mind, that those reports are, as you are moving forward and upgrading, right, you may lose those reports depending on the version that you're on. So I guess from Andre and I's perspective, we've been recommending that at least in the near term that a company would keep an older version, just so you have some at least one instance, right, that you can import your security data into, right, so that the license calculation can occur. It's not going to be totally correct with the PPAC side of things, but at least you have some license reporting, if you need it in the near term as well. All right, so let's look at where what data is actually coming from PPAC, and where's this data stored, and how is this all being, generated behind the scenes. So in a couple of versions of 10.43 and especially in 10.44, you'll start to see here that there are new licensing tables that actually contain this detailed information on the license requirements. If we start at the base, right, the biggest one of these new tables, right, that kind of lists out all of the different license SKUs for a particular environment. You can start to go in and see the licensing all SKUs table, right? That's going to include your SKU name, a priority on the license itself, a group name along with that of each license. And so what you'll actually start to see as you look through this, right, if we go on to the next slide here, is that each license, right, we can kind of rank them in this priority, right, where we have our premium SCM and finance licenses at the top. We then have a group of SCM, finance, and commerce, right? Those kind of create the first bucket of our licenses there, right? You also notice that those licenses, including or excluding the premium ones, right? But SCM, finance, and commerce, right, all are the same price. If you go and look at the pricing grid or data that we looked at earlier, right? And then the next tier is kind of your project operations, human resources, right? Those are the same price. And then you start to look down at the bottom where there's no group, right? And you have your operations activity team member, then that HR self-service, right? So you kind of have this really nice priority hierarchy here, right, for the licenses. And so what then happens is if we continue down this path and we start looking at additional tables that are being introduced, we have this idea of the objects themselves, right, are really the key piece that is driving the license requirements for this particular user, right? So we have an idea where we have this entitlement object, right, which is basically an object in the system. And then depending on the access the user has to that object, right, will dictate the license that's required for that. So in this case, the licensing all entitled permissions, right, kind of lays out the idea of if you have above your access level is a 2, which is write, update, or create, update, or delete permissions to an object, right, then you require a particular license SKU. So if we bring these two ideas together, I wrote a really quick query here, right, which basically joins these two topics or ideas together, where we can actually bring in the object itself, get a securable type, and tie the license to it. This is kind of your base layer, I guess, right, of your object licensing in this case, right? So now we can basically know and say, if you have above read permission to this object, here are the licenses that would meet the requirements for that, right? And so this is kind of the base, I guess, idea, right, that we are looking for in this case. And so when we are looking to determine what licenses a user role duty or privilege has, we have to look at all of the object access that user role duty or privilege has and try to figure out what's the combination of licenses that allow me to meet the requirements that for every object that I'm assigned in this case, right? And so that's really the key point that we're really looking at here. All right. And so there are other tables that are kind of sitting on top of these base tables as well. And so when we start looking up, there's a set of licensing and then either role duty or privilege requirements summary view. And so if you look at the licensing role requirement summary view in this case, right, you can see that we can keep working our way up, and it's kind of bringing these ideas together. And so in this case, we're actually tying this off to a security role, right? So we could very easily, be able to say this role requires these licenses or meet these requirements. And you can see that we have the same data that we're looking at here is actually what's going to populate the user security governance reports later on, right? So you can see the entitled, the not entitled, right? Not required. Like these are the columns that are filling those grids. So we just wanted to point that out in this case as well. So we can then look at the more detailed view, right? So that's kind of your base, the licensing role duty privilege, right, from that requirement there view. And then if you want the detailed view, which is going to go down to your object level, right, then you can look at there's detailed reviews around these license requirement views as well. So in this case, we're looking at the user, right? So we can see there's a user rec ID there in the middle. You can tie that back to user info, right? And you'd be able to see this user requires this license, right, based on the fact that they're assigned this object, right? And so you can kind of start to tie those together as well. All right, so really when we talk about methodology changes, right, the big overarching ideas that have changed, right, between where we were initially versus now, one of the really big things, like Andre mentioned, is the fact that objects themselves are now driving all license requirements, right? There was this idea previously where the objects would kind of categorize your access or license initially, right? And then privileges would tell you the privileges the user was assigned would actually tell you which licenses they need. Now it's all driven off object access, all the way from team member to activity to the license SKUs of finance, SCM, commerce, right? Those are all it's all being driven at the object level. The next key point is that there are actually couple additional object types that are actually have licenses tied to them, right? Previously, the menu items, menu item displays, menu item outputs, menu item actions, those are still held over, right, from previously. Those were the entry points that Andre talked about initially. But now we also have service operations, data entities, and data entity methods, right? So the access to those can actually drive your license requirements as well. So something to keep in mind from that side of things. Again, we move away from the privilege-based licensing where privileges assigned to the user, right, are causing certain license queues, right? Again, it's all being done at the object level. And so really, when we're looking at this, right, we're trying to find the lowest licenses or the combination of licenses, right, that costs the least amount of money for an organization that would meet the requirements of all of the objects assigned to the user, right? So there's this calculation that's trying to be done to trying to figure out which combination of licenses would actually be the lowest amount, right, that we can assign to the user that would cost the least amount of money. So that optimization is what we're trying to figure out at the end of the day. And then one key point, and there's kind of a host of these smaller things as well. I don't consider this one smaller, but that Microsoft is trying to address is the idea that the sysadmin role, we finally get a definitive answer on this. If users assign the sysadmin role, they do not require a license. There's no enforcement, I guess, that's occurring to users that are assigned the sysadmin role. And so that is a big change, I guess, from previously, where we kind of got multiple answers on whether or not sysadmin or user assigned sysadmin actually needed a license or not. We never got a clear answer. Microsoft has finally come out and said that if you're assigned a sysadmin role, you do not require a license as long as you are not performing caveat, as long as you're not performing business functions in that case, right? So as long as you're not putting in actual transactions or things like that. The second you do that, technically you should be assigned the actual role that allows you to do that. If you're just performing actual sysadmin duties in the system, then you do not need a license. So
to add on that, Alex, there's also a question in the meeting chat about do service accounts require licenses? And also over there is a bit of difference between the CE-based apps and finance operations. What is a service account or not? And actually, if you perform actions like batch jobs for integration services, then also service accounts do need a license as you are creating transactions.
Yeah, Microsoft definitely went through the same kind of thing. They've tried to more rigidly define what a service account is, what a external account is, right? So there's definitely some changes on that front, right? But yeah, as Andre said, and that also goes, we're going to say the forbidden word multiplexing, right? That if you worry about that as well, right? It's the same idea. If you're performing a task from an external system that is accessing F&O data, right? That external system and users that are using that, right, need to be assigned as if they were performing that task within F&O. So that multiplexing idea does not change, but it's becoming more obviously rigidly enforced now with the enforcement side. All right. So with that, Andre, I will hand it over to you to talk about some PPAC licensing.
That's correct. A bit of the available reporting in Power Platform Admin Center and also LCS. So we can directly go to the next slide. And to be honest, I will also just a bit of hurry up here as Microsoft will replace the current reports with some better overview, what they call a V2 version. Unfortunately, we are under NDA and can't talk about it yet, but I'm part of a private preview program where we will also just provide feedback and see if the data is accurate, understandable, and actionable. At least the new views are already way better than we have today. Microsoft introduced the PPAC licensing details where they just highlight all different SKUs, but also just combinations. So if you see finance, for example, you have 20 licenses available and you need 33, then you do need to acquire more licenses and assign them to the users. There are also just some licenses stating like commerce or finance or supply chain management. In that case, there is a role defined which can meet just either these three, then you can choose between them. In case there is one user having multiple roles, just already like introduced, then also that user needs to have more than one license, and that can be fulfilled with a base license for finance and an attached for SCM, for example, or just vice versa. The available reporting itself, you can drill down into some details of the users, then you can see if something is wrong. Or just what needs to be assigned. And you can also export the details where you can create more detailed analysis in, for example, Excel or maybe Power BI reports. Just a few screenshots of how that current PPAC licensing looks like today. We can go to the next slide. Just the first overview where you can also just choose we want to have only the production environment visible or also non-production environments. And for just partner tenants, it's an option to also just review what's ongoing and if the data is correct or not. Then you can click on a view to get some information about available seats, which is just how much of license did you acquire or have available to assign to the users. And there's another slide where we can just see some information about the users, where with an icon, a warning icon, it is just highlighted that these users don't have the required license as of today, meaning that we should assign those licenses. What is not available in this view is if they are also just already licensed for another part of the application or what other roles they have apart from this license. So there's a way for improvement here as well. And that's something we can just also solve in, for example, an Excel sheet. And that's on the next slide, I thought. Yes. So in that view, you can just import all data, focus on a specific environment, and just check the data between what is required, what is assigned. And in this case, in Excel, you can also use it as a to-do or action list, where as an example, I highlighted here just one cell where an incorrect license is assigned to a user. If we just continue, similar reports are available also in LCS. And you can access that from the main page with just a user license consumption report, which will show you a bit of similar data, but done in the LCS style. I think the next slide is about just some ongoing things and a demo of what we can do or can't do today. Then I will take over the screen sharing and show some details in the application. Just for example, the reports are available in Power Platform Admin Center. If you click on exports, it will just generate an exports if you start it now, and you can just refresh this once a day. So if you already started it 2 hours before, you can't do it again. Then you have to wait for the next day. Hopefully that will be improved in future as well. This takes a bit of time of getting the data available, but once you have that data, you can just use, for example, Power Query to get the data in Excel and make some nice views, for example, some pivot tables on which users to have what finance roles or what licenses are required for each of the users. And you can also just use the licensing report data and aggregate it to just create a list, for example, for all security roles and what role license is required for that. Because that information is now missing in the application, you can do it just with the CSV export today. And some things that Microsoft is working on, and there might be some issues still. There was also a question already, is everything solved as of today? Probably not. If you look at just the license usage summary preview, then you can see there's one user having, for example, finance, human resources, and supply chain management requirements. And over here, you can see some details about, suppose this user would have an commerce, does it have all objects entitled, or are there some not entitled? And you can also see it in detail per securable object, where, for example, you can also just filter or sort on the not entitled to see which objects are those. In this case, 720 are covered by finance, and 25 are not covered, but then some are in human resources, some in supply chain management. The question is, what is causing this, and is it really only 7? No, there are more entitlements, but it did start with finance to just deduct from the main part, as that one was one of the licenses required. Then it went to some others. If you want to know some more details, also I highlighted this one in my blog today. The user role licenses, what you see here is some incorrect data, where 2 times finance is reported today, where the first one should be finance, the second one should be supply chain management, but that's not on this report. But if you look at just April, then all the details are correct. And April, just the license quantity is set to 1. That's also, if you just download the CSV file, the license quantity will be 1 or 0 to be able to make totals per user per license SKU. On the role licenses, you can see more details, and there's some confusion usually on this view, what to do with it, how to look at the data. In case you just want to view data, my recommendation would be just view data for one security role only. So if we take, for example, accountant, then there will be something here which is understandable because everything is just meant to look at the entitled and not entitled data. The accountant role itself, if you look at finance and finance premium, they don't have any not entitled, so that would be just the correct license to assign for this security role. And all others do have a lot of not entitled objects in the application. That would be an option to check. However, if you look at another one, which is just on purpose created to let Microsoft consider to bring back the details of what licenses are really required for a single role, I created one where it has access to multiple parts of the application. Now it thinks it should be maybe finance, but not completely. But then if you look at this view, where to find what menu items are, or just menu items, securable objects are causing the not entitled, you can find them, but do they all just, which ones are they covered, and should I then have one attached or multiple attached licenses? That's not visible in this form today. So that's a bit of annoying issue. And also in my blog, but I will just highlight it a bit. I did do highlight that you can have a filter on the privilege name everything containing view but not maintain, SKU name team member, and then everything not entitled higher than 1, as all read-only access should be entitled with just view access. Then you can check for details in the application in case a privilege is incorrectly created. In my blog, I highlighted one option where, for example, the view of tax transactions, there were 3 not entitled menu items for the read-only rule, and that was just caused by an extension of a localization for India, where the 3 objects were having not only read, but also create, update, and delete permissions. In that case, it's not that the license calculation is wrong, it's that the standard application has just provided more access than intended. In that case, you can either create a support ticket for Microsoft, but if you need to solve it quickly, you can just duplicate that privilege, change the access rights, and then continue with just the proper access. That doesn't mean that you need to change all privileges with this issue yourself in the application. Only do it in case you think, hey, I created an read-only role. This is just requiring now a finance license. Why? Then only focus on those privileges causing the issue and not all of them, which is having an issue. Well, let's go back to Alex for some more details.
Awesome. So yeah, the feature that Andre was kind of showing there at the end is really the user security governance feature. So if we want to dive into that a little bit more, as was mentioned, I think in the chat, this is a feature that in 10.43 and previous was available as a preview feature, right? So you had to go and enable it via feature management. It is now standard as part of the 10.44 release in the application. It was the user security governance feature is one that exists or was an IP acquisition by Microsoft as part of the Executive Automator X Plus offering, and they basically brought in a bunch of the features and functionality that that team had kind of built to help with some of the license reporting. And so once that feature is enabled, if you're on a previous version, you can go to your system administration, security, and then there's a user security governance area under there. There's a bunch of different features and functionality as part of the overall feature set. The one that we're focused on here today is this license usage summary report, which is, Andre was pointed out, right, goes across user role, and duty and privilege, right? So you can see the license required for that. And the big thing here that is kind of the overarching idea from this, right, is this idea of entitled versus not entitled. And so what Microsoft just basically does across these, right, is to go in and say, okay, this user is either based on this combination, right? So in this case, this user, right, if they were assigned that Alfonso user, right, it was assigned a finance license, right, that's highlighted. We can see that they have 720 accesses that would be covered by that entitlement, but they have 25 that wouldn't be, right? So they basically have 25 accesses that where the finance license doesn't meet the requirements of that, right? And so that's kind of the idea behind this, right? Whether you go to the user role report, the role, the duty, the privilege, right? They all have this idea of entitled versus not entitled. And so what you can actually see if you go to some of these other reports, right, is that you can go in and actually get a different viewpoint of this data, right? And again, all of this is coming from PPAC, right? All of this is getting pushed down into your F&O environment, so you can see the end result of the data that's being generated, right? But the actual logic that's actually generating this, you don't. That's all handled within PPAC and is kind of a black box at this point. So Andre and I are kind of doing reverse engineering or putting our detective hats on, right, to try and figure out kind of what's happening behind the scenes here. But if we look at the user role, right, this breaks down, instead of just looking at the user level, right, now we're looking at the user and role combination. What's the license that's required to be assigned in this case? And again, you get the detailed look at the bottom to say this, that's the actual objects assigned to this particular role and whether that they're entitled or not from that perspective. And then you can go down and break it down by role in this case. One thing I did want to point out, and Andre kind of did already as well, is that for like roles, duties, and privileges, you're going to see an entry for each role tied to each license, right? And so the idea here is that you can kind of see across the different licenses, right, which one best fits for this particular role, right? So again, if we were to look at this, the idea or the goal in this case, right, is we're trying to get to a point where the not entitled column, right, is 0, right? If we can get to that point, then we know that this license actually covers this role. So if we look here, right, we can see for the accountant role, either a finance or finance premium license, right, meets that requirement, which makes sense. But for example, the commerce one that we have selected, there's a number of more than 1,500 different objects, right, that are not entitled based on that requirement, right? So yeah, one key point here, because when you first run this report, and I kind of got caught by this too, is Microsoft doesn't put all of the roles together, right, from a sorting perspective in the default report. So when I first came here, it just showed that I think the first result was this commerce for the accountant role. And I was like, why would Microsoft show this? That's not the correct license for this. And then I finally figured out, oh, if you sort these, and you actually filter them to a particular role, it actually shows all of the licenses for each role, duty, and privilege, right? And then it's up to the end user then to figure out, okay, well, what is the best license for this role based on whether they're entitled to or not. So just to point out, right, the same thing can happen at the duty level and at the privilege level. And again, you always have the detailed reports here at the bottom to actually show, which objects are causing that particular license and whether they're entitled or not. Andre, do you want to talk about the reviewing license requirements here?
Yes and no. Actually, I just realized that I was a bit too quick with my demo. That should be after these slides. But at least, so far, also as we've seen now in the chat and in the Q&A, the license enforcement, the journey is really hard until today. It still will be a bit hard, but Microsoft is aware of particular issues and is working on that to fix it. A lot is already fixed today. And also just, there are differences between what was practice with the privilege-based and now the object level calculations. What I usually did myself is make a comparison at clients. What was it just last week with the old calculation method, and what is the license level with the Power Platform admin-based calculation? And sometimes I decided like, hey, this is wrong, and I think it should be a different license. In that case, you can just log an incident at Microsoft, and they need to find out if it's just due to a privilege or is it due to an issue with the calculation part. Also, I've seen one question from Dennis where he said, well, there's just an incorrect reporting for base and attach. Just one point to mention here is that the base and attach column or indication is removed from the licensing requirements suggestions. Also, the new report does not have it. You need to decide yourself what license should I use for the base and what for the attach. Either of the combinations will work. So that is already solved, but it was just by highlighting it in previous versions, then it was just causing a lot of insecure or just confusion to people around the world.
Yeah.
And
all right,
the demo time was already done. So apologies for that.
So yeah, some of the key takeaways that I have, at least right now, is that obviously, as Andre kind of alluded to as well, right, reviewing user license assignments is much more important now. I think a lot of times previously companies would maybe push off the license reviews, right, because it is hard. Microsoft does not make this easy. And the reporting leaves a little bit to be desired in some cases, right? So, but because of the enforcement side, it has to become a much more important process. And so, Like we talked about, the enforcement of the user licenses coming later this year. So make sure you're being proactive about it. You really don't want to have to wake up on November 1st with a bunch of IT tickets, right? Because users can't log in. That would not be good. And really the one big thing that I can kind of start to recommend, right, is really this idea that we really should have a review of the license changes. It should be a part of your user management and security management processes, right? When you assign a role to a user, right, what's the license impact of this? When you're changing roles, duties, and privileges, there should be a license piece to that to ensure, hey, did I just change a particular role by the changes that I made to the object assignments, right? Whether I'm assigning a duty or privilege, right? Did I just change this from license A to a completely different license now, or requiring additional licenses, right? Because of what I assigned. And so, one of the big things that I can say here is to make sure to test all your changes in a non-prod environment first, even though that those aren't, don't have license enforcement. You can still look at the reporting, right, and get those. And as Andre mentioned, right, one of the new things that we are running into, right, is this idea that the license requirements for a particular user role, duty, or privilege can change with an update to the PPAC side, and doesn't even require D365 update, right? So I don't even have to update D365. Something can happen on the PPAC side, and all of a sudden my license calculations are different. And this is something that we both push back on, and others in the community, right, to say, if you're going to start changing license analysis, right, you need to have some release notes or something to let us know that this is happening. And so I'm really hoping that that is something that Microsoft will add before the actual enforcement goes in. Awesome. At the end of this slide deck, we do have a bunch of resources, both from Andre and myself, as well as other MVPs and Microsoft in the space. And with that, we can start to try and we do have a couple minutes left. We can start the Q&A. Whoa, that was a cool transition. I posted a link for the PowerPoint that we used today in the chat. You can also get it on my website as well with the QR code you see there, if you'd like. You can absolutely, like I said, reach out to Andre and I after the fact if you'd like to chat about things or have questions. You can absolutely feel free to reach out. I know we do have at least one in the Q&A. See if we can try and answer some of these. Can we rely on license reports in PPAC or license use summary in F&O? Last time I checked, the data there was completely incorrect and very confusing. Did Microsoft fix all the issues? I don't know if we can definitively say that Microsoft fixed all the issues. I think they are trying to address those, based on kind of triaging what's the most egregious of those. I think there's probably always going to be some, minor differentiations or inconsistencies. Hopefully they'll get the larger ones fixed before the actual enforcement. But I think it's closer than where it has been from a PPAC to F&O side. I don't know, Andre, if you have a sense on that.
Sorry, I'm just, now I am able to open the Q&A again. Which question are you now? That was.
I was just looking at the license data from PPAC to F&O and the validity of the data.
Actually, that's currently maintained by Microsoft, pushed to F&O, the data, underlying data. There might be some issues still, but so far what I've seen in the past, then all is already fixed. I saw also one post, I thought from Marian, where he highlight does this mean that this role needs attached licenses? As of the current state, yes. However, you can check if there is an issue in it, just like I mentioned, if there's a read permission or just read privilege, which has write permissions in between for one of the menu items, that can be solved yourself. In case what I've seen in the past is also that one menu item was tagged with HR, which was completely incorrect, where also standard security rules were impacted. In that case, report it to Microsoft and they need to fix it. Also, what I've seen last week is that the manager role required an commerce or finance or supply chain, which should be a team member. And also that one is already fixed by Microsoft. So in case you see things like I don't trust it, then dive into the details, or also just reach out with some questions. We can try to help you as well understand if this is due to a privilege or due to wrong information in the backend.
Absolutely. All right. I know we're running up against time. There's still some questions in the chat. I apologize we couldn't get to all of them. Like I said, if you want to reach out to Andre and I afterwards, we're happy to continue the conversation. But I do appreciate everybody joining today. This is a topic that Andre and I are really passionate about. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and so we'll obviously make sure to follow us as well as others in the community as we kind of work through this all together on our journey. So with that, I'll hand it back to Faisal for any follow-ups.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex and Andre. As Alex rightly mentioned, this is a topic we can go on for days and nights in discussions and questions, and this is never ending. And there are a lot of announcements, and someone rightly mentioned whatever the information we can get these two experts in half an hour, Microsoft is just going to give this in 2 years. So it's a lot to absorb, a lot to learn. So again, thank you so much, Alex and Andre. If you will have any more questions, you can also reach out to me, and I can pass on this information to Andre and Alex, and they are always there on the community to answer any questions. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you all again in next upcoming events. Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.